Okay, everybody, we are about halfway through the class and we've saved characters for last because characters happen in so many stages. And in fact, the first step of this whole project is just gathering reference. Compared to some of the other things we've been working on, characters are a step up in complexity. This is because from one of the things that makes it hard to do characters is because we spend so much time looking at people that we both know exactly what they should look like implicitly, like subconsciously, but also our brains have gotten really good at ignoring information about what people look like because we stare at them so much, we let the subconscious process it. Compared to buildings, it doesn't take a long time to stare at a building and say, oh, here's the pieces that come together. Staring at a human and understanding its component parts is a lot tougher. And we tend to see people, their clothing, their pose, their hair, their facial features, their proportions, their skin tone, all of that is just one big system. And it's hard for us to break it up. And so we have to start by gathering lots of reference. So I hear a lot of people, especially when they're first starting out, because I never hear a professional say this. I only ever hear amateurs say that real artists don't use reference. Here's G. He's like a really incredibly talented artist and sort of like the current, like one of the great illustrators living today. And this is someone that gets pointed out because this guy can just go up to a wall and just start drawing anything from memory, and including characters, complex designs, and he gets almost perfect anatomy and proportion. He never lays down any perspective lines, never builds anything else out. But this is also somebody who's been drawing nonstop every day for his entire life since he was capable of holding a pencil and still does. He doesn't have to work with reference because he's that far advanced that the reference is so in his head because he so regularly practices. But when you start out, you have to use reference, and reference is really essential. In fact, this quote is wrong because it's the opposite that's true. In fact, whenever I see someone post, I drew this without reference, I would point out that nobody in the creative field doesn't have reference at least available to them. If you look at any artist's wall or like library of books, what's on their bookshelf? It's a bunch of books that are full of reference because good artists need it. And deciding that you don't need it comes out of laziness because you think it's going to save you time to not have to dig out the images you need to help you. But that's a terrible approach because it's just going to be shooting yourself in the foot. The only people that say they work without reference are amateurs who don't know what they're doing and liars. And I suppose that one guy, Chong Chi, that's the other person, and that's pretty much it. But even then, he has said he doesn't use reference now, but to get to where he's at, he used a ton of reference all the time, but he used it and accessed it so frequently that it is stored in his brain. There are some things that I can model without needing reference because I've done it enough times. And if you give me something new, though, that I haven't modeled before, I need a lot of reference. Remember, we're training to be professionals, so we want professional workflows. We want to practice to think the way a professional does. An adage goes, if you have 8 hours to chop down 8 trees and you have a dull axe, you don't just hack away at those trees for 8 hours with your dull axe. You spend 6 hours sharpening your axe and then 2 hours chopping, which is a much, much more energy conservative way of doing things. And I want you to think about reference as sharpening your axe. It's knowing what and where. It's laying out a plan. And it's not time wasted, it's time well spent. A well-planned approach is going to save you time. Not only planning for all the reference you need, but it's a good idea to say when you're going to do what. It's part of the reason the structure of this class that I divvy it out for you in these day and week sections about like when, what to do when, even though you have some flexibility and some freedom about what times of the week to tackle these things. This is my recommended pace that if you can follow it, you're going to have to spend the least amount of energy and effort to learn these skills. I came up through the Boy Scouts, and our adage was always be prepared. You walk into every scenario prepared for what you're doing. And you don't open up a blank canvas in Blender to start modeling and not be prepared. Plans will always change. Your reference and your plans and things like that you might divert from, and that's okay. We're trying to get the best start we possibly can. And in fact, for my friend and colleague, very talented concept artist Ricardo Gomares, told me once that he spends at least 20% of however much time he has, and he allots that to research. So if he has 5 days to complete an illustration, he will spend 1 day on nothing but gathering information and sketching out thumbnails and getting rough concepts before he starts working on it. If he has a month, he'll spend 3 to 4 days just working on that stage. So about 20% of the time that he has is going to be spent no matter how big the project is. If he has one day to do something, he will spend a couple hours that morning. So if he had 10 hours to do something, he'd spend 2 hours of it just gathering reference. And I find that's a good rule to remember, and it definitely serves you well. We're going to be breaking the same concept across 3 weeks, and so picking it very wisely is important. And remember, nothing you do is going to be original. Everything is remixing of things that already exist. And so we're going to be picking from existing concepts because there is a story being told there, and that person is trained, and that practice is to come up with a character design to tell a story. We're trying to figure out how to convey that story done in the concept. Since it's in a concept class, this is more of a modeling focus class. We want to take that question of what am I making out of the matrix. So we have it's very important for me to have you pick a specific image. And remember, when you're looking at reference, especially photo reference, the camera does lie. Not only does concept art lie, the camera also lies. And this is why we want to get as much reference as possible, because these two guys you would swear are two different people, but really they're just using two different lenses. And you can see from the same person what an enormous difference that can make. I'm going to lay it out so you can see in somebody's face. So the first thing you're going to do on this project, and I'm going to load it up right now, is I made a Pinterest board for you of some different character concepts, and I'll keep adding to this, and you'll see something is in common with all of them. Two things. One, they're all bipedal, meaning they have 2 arms and 2 legs. I do this because we're going to want to texture and rig and animate these. So you might be saying, hey, I want to do an animal or a dog or this creature with 8 arms or something like that. That's great, but let's, for this project, try to keep things simple. Human characters, humanoid characters are pretty common. I try to include some animal style humanoid characters in there, and they're pretty common, but that's part of the process. Because we want something that's bipedal, because it's like what most of the workflow is based around. It's what the rigs are going to be based around. It's easiest to work with for this initial stage, for this first project. After that, you could do whatever you want. And I would ask that you pick something off of this concept board. If you want to do something different, in fact, a lot of these link to portfolios, like say ArtStation for an artist, and they have similar concepts. So if you see out of this, you didn't like this one, but maybe you find another character concept in here that you do like, that's fine too. Just let me know. Ask, hey, would this be a good concept to go off of? But what I want you to do is not pick things that are already 3D models, and not try to do something that's your own designer from your own imagination. Because again, I want to make sure that you're working from a good concept, because that's going to have a lot to do with your success on this project. I have a pretty good variety of like styles and body types. I try to get a couple more like realistic bodies without having them to be too detailed, because it's another reason I chose these concepts, is they're relatively simple and they have relatively few features. This is maybe one of the more complicated ones, but I wanted to pick something that's simple enough that you don't get yourself in a position where you pick something too complicated and now you're really stuck. So another thing that we're going to put on that, whatever you pick as your prime inference there, that's your key concept. And it's probably the most important thing on your pure ref or concept board, and everything else is going to build around it. Something else that we have in addition to that are what's called orthographic drawings. Sometimes these are called character turnaround sheets or model sheets or things like that. You could certainly search for them, but they usually involve something like this: a front, side, and maybe even a back view. And the character won't always be standing. Sometimes they'll be standing in a T-pose. Sometimes they'll be standing neutrally, but not always. These are great because they can really help us figure out the proportions of the character and make plans for how to stage out, how like the basic block-in of the character. Although if you don't have one, which most character designs you're going to find online do not have full turn-on sheets. Some of them do, and some of the concepts I presented do. But I'll show you actually how to make them yourself, even if you're not really a super great artist, just because it's a good way of getting yourself started. Now, even if you're doing a character that's stylized, I like to gather as much photo reference as I can. So I was doing a project once for an illustration, and the person wanted it to be a Mercury-style spacesuit. And it turns out at the time, I was not that far from an Air and Space Museum that had one of those spacesuits. So drove down there, got my camera, and I took a bunch of close-up photos. Even though it was supposed to, the final product was a painting and I wasn't going to be using all these details, this information helped me fill in the gaps. You see, this larger spacesuit has all this stuff going on, but when you start taking closer up pictures, looking for individual details, you start to see those things. So we're often looking for reference that are going to be shots of details or things that we don't otherwise have or know. We're also going to look for item details. So sometimes you can find illustrations of, say, how pants on this guy's costume might be buttoned. Or details of, I can't see this guy's exact sword, but this is probably something like it. And I don't see from this painting the exact sort of braiding and things like that, but maybe this gives me an idea of what that might look like. Often, we can't find the exact reference, especially in photo reference, of the thing the character might be having, but we try to find something close because we want to figure out what the concept artist is thinking so we can best recreate it. We're also going to want to collect some images of poses, poses that feel like the character's mood or attitude. Some of these concepts include poses already, but you might want to add more, search out more, or take some poses, some photos of yourself posing in different ways that is going to express who the character is. Something like this is going to have a different feeling from a character than something like this superhero flying pose. So we kind of got like more of a Spider-Man and more of a Superman. You could just see based on the dynamics of that pose. We're also going to want to get close-up details. If I was going to make like a lizard character, I might get some close-ups of lizard skin and get some idea of like what the material might look like. So when I'm texturing it, I know what I'm trying to recreate. We want to make sure we're accounting for all the things in our characters. Even if they're going to be mostly flat colors, we want some idea of their surface reflectivity so that when we're texturing, we have something to go off of. You also want to get, sometimes this is called lighting reference, sometimes it's called mood reference. I like to find paintings that I feel evoke the attitude I'm looking for. Could be the attitude of the character or the scene or the stage the character is in. This is going to help inspire how we're going to actually light our character and what the style of the scene should be. So think a little bit about like what's the mood, what's the attitude. We also want to get an idea of what's the style you're going for. Sometimes I like to find 3D models that already exist and photos of those and try to capture it, because I'm going to take a 2D image and turn it into a 3D model. And so am I trying to go for something super realistic like The Witcher, which I wouldn't recommend for this project, or am I going for something a little bit more stylized like this Disney Infinity figure of Darth Vader? So we could take images of styles that evoke a sense of how should this character feel, what should their 3D model look like? How many sides should I have on things? So you might want to go and dig around for some 3D models that have the sort of visual style you're looking for and that are done in the way you want. I kind of call this like visual language or inspiration photos. So with that, let's actually go through and start building out our little reference board.